and no deeper honor to me than introducing my dear friend and colleague, Mr. Mark Bruzonsky. Mark has always been gracious with his time and effort and patience with our technology here, right? To wait on us, volunteering his time to talk to us almost every semester on the news, whether you watch the main networks or other media sites. You see lots of experts, lots of academics, but I am sure you do conclude that they don't have much to offer, whether on the Middle East, Syria, Iran, Iraq, Saudi Arabia. Mark is not one of them. Okay. Over 200 trips internationally. Back in 1977, he met with Anwar Sadat, the president of. Just because of the interest of time, I'm going to turn it. So, no, that way people will see you.
Two different flavors of mini HDMI.
Did we choose the speaker? Oh, headphones.
Yeah.
Okay, the glitch is persisting, so we're gonna stick with what we got.
They'll hear my voice, and I'll tell you what, I'll make a recording, and then they can see me. Okay, here we go.
Perfect, perfect. Okay, so the last thing I want to say is that I have two classes combined, for this session: international relations and Middle East politics. Thanks, folks. IT, thank you. Mark, as I said, has been involved in many, many capacities, in many, many ways. From him, you will get an honest, candid, profound perspective about the issues that we will discuss today. So, Mark, the Cubs won last night. I don't know if you want to tell us who's going to win on November 8th.
Oh, you're making it so difficult or so easy. I'm not sure which one.
The world has not been, as tense as it is today. I'm going to leave this completely to you, to talk about. The floor is completely yours. My apologies again for all the glitches that we had that wasted like 15 minutes of your time, of everybody's time here. But it's all yours now, and You lead the discussion, and when the time comes for students to ask questions, I ask each and every one of you, those who want to raise questions or make comments, to make your comment or question very concise, very quick. Introduce yourself first and come close here, just so that your voice will carry through the computer. We begin. It's all yours, Mark.
Thank you so much, Hisham. We've known each other a long time. We're at an unusual situation, and I'm going to try to do something a little different today. I'm going to try to explain why the system is rigged. In this case, I mean the foreign policy system. I don't mean Donald Trump's view of rigged. But he's right to talk about how the system is rigged, and the other candidate has spent most of her life participating and rigging the system. Now, what do I mean by that? You're interested in foreign policy, you're interested in the Middle East. Why do we have the foreign policy we do in the Middle East? Why are we continually at war? Why are we fighting all these proxy wars? Why, when the general population is against the things we're doing, do we keep doing it and keep double downing on it? I would think that a lot of people will be voting for Trump. They're sick of the system. They don't understand it. They're sick of the politicians. They're willing to vote for anyone who will promise them something different. And when it comes to foreign policy, okay, look, I'm going to say it as I've come to experience it over the last 30 years in Washington. Many of you may be upset or disagree with the things I'm going to say, but the best way to spend our time today is for me to honestly give you the conclusions I've reached, and for you to ask the most probing and profound questions you have. Don't be afraid of saying, I disagree with you. Don't be afraid of saying, how could you believe that, Mark? Just when we get to that in a few minutes, let me have it, just like, in a sense, I'm going to let you have it. Our system is rigged because we don't live in a democracy and we don't really have freedom. We live in a kind of oligarchy, a rich person's oligarchy, where the two major parties are funded by the super rich. So the super rich buy the politicians and the parties. Then they also buy the media, the mainstream media, which explains to us supposedly what those policies are, but skip increasingly speakers like me, who were very welcome years ago when I was much more part of the establishment and didn't really understand things. I was quite naive myself. I came to Washington, went to all the embassies, went to all the think tanks, wrote reports, traveled around the world, met presidents and prime ministers, only to realize many years later that I was still living in Plato's cave that I thought I had escaped. I had just moved to a different room where there was a little bit of sunshine. Okay, the foreign policy system is rigged because the special interests run my city. The special interests aren't just the Israelis and the Jewish lobby, even though they are the most effective and the most profound here. There's the Saudi lobby, there's the military-industrial complex lobby. There's so many different interest groups that have the politicians in their pocket and manipulate them. When it comes to the Middle East, which is one of your primary interests and mine, let's just look at both parties. Who's the biggest contributor to the Republican Party? Sheldon Adelson. What does he declare his biggest interest in the world is? Relations with Israel. More arms, more support, more vetoes at the UN, more war preparations. His antithesis in the Democratic Party, actually they're in bed together in some ways, is Chaim Saban, the billionaire who has funded the Clintons, and the billionaire who is the primary contributor to the Democratic Party. If you look at the system here in Washington, you find revolving doors. People go between government and lobbies and the military-industrial complex. They spend their lives doing this. A good example that I know the best would be Dennis Ross, for instance, who has served in government. Then he goes to the Israeli lobby think tank. Wolf Blitzer qualifies for this. Most people don't realize Wolf was sent to CNN in the early days after working for AIPAC and the Israeli Lobby and the Jerusalem Post. Martin Iddig, who runs the Brookings Institution, the think tank of the Democratic Party here, is also an Israeli Lobby protege. They brought him here. These are careerists. They've taken over the media, they've taken over the think tanks, but it's even worse than that. They intimidate and blackball anybody who speaks up against them. They spend so much time undermining anybody who will speak up against them and won't play ball with them. Washington is more fearful than ever before. People are afraid to make phone calls and arrange lunches with each other because they think their emails and their phone calls, if they leak anything, will eventually be found out. General Cartwright, the 4-star general, tried to stop the New York Times from reporting the Stuxnet virus a few years ago. But since he said things to the New York Times guy that the New York Times guy says helped him confirm the story, even the 4-star general in retirement is now being sent to prison and going to pay a big fine. The idea is to have everybody fearful, everybody looking over their shoulder. A very narrow group of people run our foreign policy, and they run it terribly badly. We've killed millions of people since 9/11. I'm not today going to go into the 9/11 story because that would be in itself, I'll just say the government story isn't true. You don't have to believe me. The two chairmen of the committee, of the 9/11 committee, 2 years after their report, issued a statement and a report that said we were set up to fail. They acknowledged that their report was a failure, but they didn't blame themselves. They blamed how they were set up. That's a long story in itself. So here we are. Hisham, you want me to predict what's going to happen? Quite literally as we speak, Hillary is being pummeled. She's hemorrhaging. The FBI people are leaking things. This morning, the big leak, and it's a big one, is that the FBI, two FBI people have leaked to Fox News that they've actually been investigating the Clinton Foundation for a year, and that they're getting close to indicting the Clinton Foundation, so the leakers say, except the Attorney General, who oversees the FBI, is doing everything she possibly can to prevent that, hoping that Hillary will be elected, and once elected, will be able to stop the investigations. I am no supporter of Donald Trump. For me, he's a psychopath, he's a narcissist, he is an extremely dangerous man. But that doesn't mean that everything he says is wrong. When he talks about the need for term limits, when he talks about the need to stop the revolving door between government and lobbyists for at least 5 years, he actually says some things reasonable. When he talks about not blaming the Russians for everything, and he's correct in a few things, but he never actually gets to the heart of it, and he never actually, he would be so dangerous as our president, not to mention what would happen to the Supreme Court and other things. So reluctantly and with great hesitation, I'm not going to hide since we're just a few days away from it, Hillary becomes our savior, no matter how much we have to hold our nose, no matter how much we have to realize how corrupt not only she and her husband and her party are, but we don't have an immediate choice other than her. But we should wake up the next day, breathe a sigh of relief that we dodged the bullet, and realize this doesn't change how bad our system is. She will not be able to govern. She's bleeding. She's literally bleeding politically, like a boxer in a ring who comes up and they hold her hand high and say, "You win." But we're all losing. We're all losing because our system is corrupted, not on election day, but all the time. It's big money, big influence, special interest groups, and then the two areas that are supposed to protect us from this by at least exposing it, the media and academia, have unfortunately been quite co-opted. If it weren't for the internet, if it weren't for alternative news sources, things would be much worse than they are. The establishment media, nevertheless, is our dominant media. They control the debates, they control the networks, they control what most people see. And academia has been tremendously damaged over the years because government has figured out ways to get its hooks into universities with all kinds of grants. And the lobbies and the special interests, here I have my own experience with what I call the Israeli Jewish lobby. They have figured out ways to intimidate and to make everybody worried, just like producers worry who they're going to put on TV because they're going to get calls from these lobbies and maybe lose their job. Academics worry, especially before they get tenure, but even after they get tenure. Can I say this? Can I tell my students this? What happens if somebody records it? What happens if they tell the lobby, which has people literally assigned to every university all over the country? But I don't want to just emphasize the Israeli Jewish lobby. It's the one I know the best. It's the one I come from. The Saudis play a terrible role. The military industrial plays a terrible role. If you watch the news programs on TV, who advertise? Boeing, McDonnell Douglas, the big quote-unquote defense contractors do the advertising, and they support the programs we all watch. I'll say one more thing. I know some people will be offended, and I know some people will feel, God, you're not right, but we only have this short time together. Our country is the biggest war criminal country in the world. We have invaded the most countries on false pretenses. We have killed the most people, and I'm not talking about soldiers. My rough guess, putting the pieces together as best I can, are that since 9/11, we've killed 2 million Arabs and Muslims, made 5 or 6 million more destitute refugees. We're creating a whole generation which in a few years will have no education, no future, no country, and they'll be looking for however they can get back the people who have done this to them. That's why after all these years in Afghanistan, the Taliban is stronger, meaning the Afghans, they're stronger than they were before we invaded and bombed them all these years. That's why the Islamic State in Iraq and Syria, these things didn't start from nowhere. These are the people who were fighting us under other names before, and now they've been extra radicalized, and they've to us under new names, which we create the names, by the way. During the Cold War, they were the evil, terrible people. And then, of course, we remember the McCarthy era. It's anybody who's against us is a terrorist. The people who fight for us and who we arm, even though they're part of the same groups, we call the good guys and the moderates. The people who are fighting against us, in many cases fighting because they're fighting an invading army that has come to their country, we brand them as terrorists, we don't care about them, we bomb the hell out of them, and then we wonder why they try to fight back and why they do some of the things they do. All right, I went through this extra fast because we had a little glitch there getting going, because I wanted to give all of you the chance to ask whatever questions are on your mind, and I'll please try to help me keep my own answers as brief as your questions if I can.
Mark, thank you. Well, so time for comments, for questions, which we have to do very concisely so that we can get as many people as possible and as efficiently as possible. So if you have a question, comment, come all the way here so that your voice will carry through the computer.
Yeah, that's good. I can see people, so that'll be good.
Yeah.
Hello.
Introduce
Hi.
yourself. Quick.
My name is Emily. Nice to meet you.
Hi,
Easy
Emily.
face.
How you doing?
I was wondering if you think that there's going to be another American Civil War after the election, because I think that the country at this point is so polarized, I don't think we can ever be completely reunified.
Well, the last part of that, we are more polarized than ever, and we are certainly not going to unify. Washington's going to be a political battleground. But just like superpowers don't fight with nuclear weapons and destroy each other, we fight proxy wars. We're actually in a world war right now. It's not just with Islamic radicals. It's with Russia, it's with China, but we fight our international wars as proxy wars because the weapons we have would destroy all of us before you and I say goodbye now today. I don't think we're going to have a civil war like what we Americans remember our Civil War to be, where with single-shot muskets we killed so many Americans. But we will have political and social civil wars that mean husband and wife can't even watch the debates together, that friendships are ending that have existed for a long time. It's happened to me with someone who, actually I'll say who, the chairman of Americans for Peace now. I've been friends with him for 30 years. But in view of what he's doing and what he represents, that friendship has been ended by me, and I've told him we're actually enemies. So that is an example of the kind of civil war that we're engaged in this country, and it will definitely continue after Election Day. I could say more, but I'm trying to stop myself so the next person can ask.
Thank you. Next.
Hello, Mr. Bruzonsky. My name is Andre, and my question is, if you were given full autonomy and authority over American foreign policy, how would you deal with ISIS, Assad, and Iran? Thank you.
Is that all?
That's very concise. Okay.
I will not be quite as concise. If, in fact, politics were eliminated from the question, in other words, he didn't ask me, what would I be able to do as president, which means in view of our political situation and our civil war. I'll take the question, what would I do as an intellectual? What would I do as a historian? What would I do as a moral person? Let's take Syria. We started the war. The Saudis and the Gulf countries provided the arms and the money because we thought we could take down the Assad regime fairly quickly, like we did in Libya and like we did in other places. We didn't understand Syria, just like we didn't understand Iraq. And, you know, we go into these places, we not only make a mess, we not only spend trillions of our own dollars, but we destroy so many people and so many families. The numbers are just unbelievable. All of these things, I would say, one, should never have started in the first place, and two, the only possible way out is we actually have to do two things. One, we actually have to sit down and talk to the people we're fighting, because in most cases, that's been my experience, in fact my experience is in all cases, they actually have at the top thoughtful, educated people who can articulate what their grievances are and who can actually discuss with you how the conflict could be ended. But if we call them subhumans, if we call them terrorists, if we don't even consider what their grievances are, why they're fighting us, and why in many cases they're winning, then of course we never get to the issue of how can we end the conflict. Then the UN needs to be totally revitalized. The UN has been used, has been manipulated. That's the forum where we should be actually sitting down and trying to reach comprehensive settlements. In order to do that, you have to have understandings with the Russians and the Chinese, not to mention the French and the Brits. Now, I could go on and on about this, but I better stop myself again.
Next. Quick, please. Quicker. Just so
Hi, Mark. My name's Harry. So I was wondering if you could talk more about the Syrian revolution and I guess what the original intention of that was, because it seems like now
the view is that everyone is, either backed by the Russians or they are Islamic terrorists. Is there a moderate group? And what was like the original intention of the Syrian people and that revolution?
All right. By definition, we have to summarize. We have to use names of countries and groups. There's actually so many different movements in each of these countries, just like here in our country, we've got so many different points of view and so many different people we look to. But the way I'm going to answer this is a little different than just looking at the current situation. After we finish, if you go to my website, if you pull down speeches, you'll see a speech at Purdue University where I tried to summarize things, and where at the very end I mentioned the following, which will show you how we planned this from the beginning. One of the generals who had been the NATO commander, he was already retired. He happened to be in the Pentagon in the days after 9/11. And one of the generals who served under him called him aside and said, "General, so good to see you here, but I need to tell you, we've been ordered to invade Iraq." This was just a few days after 9/11. And the former NATO general says, "Why? Do you have information that they were behind it?" And the serving general says, "No, in fact, that's what's so mysterious to us. We know Iraq wasn't even involved in this." So he says, "Why have you been ordered to invade Iraq, to prepare to invade Iraq?" And he says, "General, it's worse than that." And he takes him into the room and he shows him something that says the commanders of the Pentagon have been ordered to prepare to invade 7 countries and change the regimes in 7 countries in the next 5 years. At that point, the retired general says to the serving general, "Well, this must be very classified information." And of course, the serving general says it is. And he says, "Well, you have to stop talking to me. You can't tell me this anymore." Okay. Anyway, that leaked out 5 years later. He was being interviewed on not a mainstream media program, and it just sort of came up. Maybe he had his own reasons that he wanted to say it at this point. What we're doing in Syria was planned from the beginning. Whether you believe 9/11 happened the way the government story tells it, or the way I have come to believe what really happened and why, we were using that as our excuse to take over the Middle East, not just the oil and the resources, but the regimes, and to create, if we could, another 100 years of Sykes-Picot, another 100 years of foreign domination. We were doing this because the 2 primary Middle East lobby groups that control Washington, the Israelis and the Saudis, were both pushing us to do these things. So Syria didn't happen in a vacuum. It happened as part of a comprehensive plan. So many things went wrong because if you'll go back and check what we were told at the time of the Iraq invasion by Paul Wolfowitz, the number 2 man in the Pentagon, it was going to cost $60 billion, would be over in a few months, and they would welcome us with flowers when we invaded Baghdad. Yeah, here we are. Look at what's happened. Look at what's been done. Tragically, and that's what really scares me, when Hillary, battered and discredited Hillary, becomes our president soon, she's in bed with the neocons, the Israelis, and the Saudis more than ever before. She owes them. They know how to control her. They've even endorsed her publicly. Wolfowitz, the man I just told you about, one of the top ones. Each time I feel I've gone on too long, so I stop myself.
Oh, very, very interesting information. Next. Quick.
Hello.
Hi.
My name is Kerry. You've mentioned how you believe Hillary Clinton will be the next president, and you've also mentioned the rampant corruption in the Democratic National Party and her campaign. I'm wondering, does Donald Trump's stupidity, I think we can all agree he's that at least, does his stupidity really outweigh Hillary Clinton's corruption? Thank you.
Okay, now that's a provocative question.
That's good.
Stupidity is not the first word that comes to mind for me with Donald Trump. He's not the kind of person we'd expect to be our professor. He's not a learned reading person, but he's a savvy, street smart, business smart, conniving guy. He's not stupid. He's dangerously smart in some ways. What overrules him for me, and what forces me to say we have no choice right now but to be saved by Hillary. But remember what I said, instead of celebrating, we need to get up the next morning and say, okay, we dodged the bullet, but now we've got Hillary. How do we control her? How do we make sure she doesn't do the things that she's planning to do? That's not, including Syria, that's going to be very difficult. But Trump is a psychopath. 6 months ago, a friend of mine, she's now in her 80s, she's very astute, she's been involved in international affairs all her life. When Trump was looking serious, before he got the nomination, she sent me an article, which she doesn't do very often, and the article didn't talk about Trump at all, didn't say a word about Trump. It was an article about how do you investigate a person to see if they're a psychopath. And there was a checklist of 20 things. And if the person qualifies for 14 or 15 of them, they're considered a psychopath. And I read it and laughed because Trump checked every one of the 20 boxes. So, of course he's a narcissist. Of course the man is so full of himself. But don't count him out. He's smart, he's shrewd, and because of the help of WikiLeaks, because of the help of people leaking things now from the FBI, because of the Clinton Foundation scandals. But most of this goes back to WikiLeaks, and now, of course, Wienergate. That's a whole nother story. Because of all that, we could wake up with a President Trump. And let me add, one of the people who is saying this is a man by the name of Pat Caddell. Pat and I came to Washington at the same time. I was a young journalist just out of school. He was already the pollster for President Carter. In recent days, Pat has been giving interviews saying he's looking at all the data, he's a professional pollster all his life, and what he sees, that the dam may break for Hillary in the last week. And if that happens, there could be a Trump victory, and he likens it to what happened with Carter and Reagan, when up until the last week or two, they were going to win. But in the last days, he went to President Carter and said, the dam's broken, we're going to lose. Coming from him, being a professional like he is, and being a lifelong Democrat, this is really, really scary. And I think I wouldn't even be saying to people, close your eyes and hold your nose and vote for Hillary. I think I wouldn't even be saying it because I'm really troubled saying it, but I'm even more troubled with the idea that we would wake up to a President Trump.
A quick follow-up question. I know you and I can talk about these things later, Mark, but this is a time for the students. However, the next few days are going to be very critical. We have been saying a continued progression of more and more troubles for Hillary. This leads me to believe that there might be some more critical troubles in the next couple of days. So far, almost, the media, the mainstream media has been wrong as far as its predictions with regard to Trump's nomination, on behalf of the Republican Party, Trump's maybe candidacy for the presidency. I'm inclined to join Pat in his prediction that there is a good chance that Trump might make it on November 8th. How will you react on Wednesday morning if Trump is the president?
Boy, you're really provoking me. If it were just the popular election, just the popular vote. And remember, Gore got millions more votes than Bush did. I would be inclined to say, I think Pat Cadell could be right. The dam could break because of what's happening now and what's going to happen in the next couple of days. And I'll say just a bit about what I think is going to happen. But because of the Electoral College, which the Democrats know how to play, we could face another situation where the electoral vote goes to Hillary and the popular vote, because the dam break, goes to Trump. As crazy as it seems, if anyone would have said a year ago our country would be polarized like this and half the country would be willing to vote for Trump, I would have, said, I'm not sure what I would have said. Okay, to answer your question, I'm resigned to living in a war criminal oligarchy, but I'm also aware of how privileged I am. I don't have to worry they're going to come and knock on my door tonight. People that get assassinated are few, and they have to have something really secret that has to be covered up. Whether or not that person on Capitol Hill who worked for the Democratic National Committee was one of the people who leaked things to WikiLeaks, and whether or not his mysterious unsolved killing in the middle of the night one night can be traced to trying to stop him from doing what he was doing and to punish anyone who even thinks of it. It's possible. But since I'm already hardened to this, and since I think our system, when POTUS, President of the United States, takes office, he's not a dictator. He won't be able to be a Hitler. We still have institutions. We still have safeguards. They're eroded. They're not what they were. But Trump will be, if that happens, the chief of staff. He will desperately try to give orders to everyone, but he doesn't understand how Washington works. He knows how business works. He'll be out of his element here, and the magnitude of the harm he can do will be limited by the deep state institutions. Hillary will be boxed in as well. The trouble is she knows how things work here, and she'll be able to manipulate things even worse than Trump. So I guess for me, I'm taking the easy way out. I'm going to live with it, and I don't have to order any extra wine.
Well, I may have to call on you if they knock on my door, Mark. Next question, folks. Okay. Next.
Hi, my name's Anna. Thank you for being here. You mentioned that the system is rigged by an oligarchy, and we also see the position of president as the main figure for foreign policy. Therefore, how much effect on foreign policy will either Clinton or Trump actually have as president, or will it still be dictated primarily by outside influence regardless of who wins?
Okay, great question. Let's look at what just happened with Obama. Would anyone have believed when he was inaugurated, almost, I broke all my rules, and I not only went to the inaugural, I wore his hat, I had his banners, I had his buttons. I never do things. Never in my life did I do it before, and never in my life am I going to do it again, because he's destroyed hope. Would any of us believe we'd still be in Iraq? And have advisors all over the place, contractors all over the place, CIA people all over the place. More. We have more drones and more killing machines. Instincts were, I'm going to change things. I'm going to set the country in a new direction. He many things even worse than Bush and Cheney when it comes to drones and killing American citizens. Things Obama has set in motion are awful. So the And I'll even say something further that, again, many of you may find a little outrageous. A high-ranking CIA person told me this. He was really high up. He was the president with the morning CIA briefing at the White House. And when Obama he said, Obama will have to be told that he has limited industrial complex, and he needs to be reminded what they did. Break the CIA into 1,000 pieces. That was his view. Kennedy was going to end the new university was still a masterpiece, as was Eisenhower's. CEO. You can hold things back a little bit. You can ask more questions. Not the direction of what's happening, but you can sometimes put your to right what's wrong, but like order for it to change course, and it takes an awful lot of people and an awful lot for things to change. In the end, Obama is a terrible failure when it comes to for Libya. He's responsible for Syria. He super armed the Israelis, who are pushing hard for war with Iran. Just yesterday, team Mike Morell, the former acting CIA director, came out saying, we need to kill Russians. We need the Russians to know their city. We need to consider attacking Iran because of what's happening in Yemen. You can't believe some of the things that are being planned and said here. The excuse for what's happened the last 15 years that I've been here in Washington is in motion now.
Wow.
Good morning, Mr. Bruzonsky. My name is Max, and my question into the situation in Yemen, and my question is, Clinton's administration will be playing in Yemen?
Boy, I'm not an expert on Yemen, where I've never been, so I'm not going to comment on internal dynamics, but only on the geopolitical macro situation. The proxy war in the Middle East, you can't look at Syria separate from Yemen, separate from Palestine, separate from Iraq. Everything is connected in one way or another. The Saudis, after the Arab Spring, decided they had to retake control of the region. They put General Sisi, the junta general, in, and they've paid $25 billion to keep him in power in Egypt. He's failing, and they can only provide so much because their own situation at home is becoming increasingly difficult. In Yemen, in Bahrain, with the Gulf Cooperation Council, the Saudis have become neocons. That's why they've lined up with the Israelis. That's why they expect that they can get Hillary, which is why they all want Hillary rather than Trump. Even though you would have thought they'd want the Republicans. You would have thought they'd want the successors to Bush and Cheney. No. They want Hillary. They know what she's made of, and they know they all own her. They know they've all got their hooks into her, and they have for a long time. They probably have a lot of really bad things on her too, if she should ever turn on them. So I expect when Hillary takes office, bleeding as she is, first woman commander-in-chief, the Israelis and the Saudis will very quickly push her and push her and push her to do what they want. They want to challenge the Russians in Syria and take down the Assad regime. That was part of the seven-nation strategy from the beginning. They want to control the region, which means using more drones, using more CIA, using more coups. And they want to isolate, especially the Saudis, but also the Israelis. They want to isolate Iran, and when they get the chance, when they get the excuse, take on the Iranians, because it's not just Iran, it's Hezbollah as well. Hezbollah is really the threat to Israel, with 100 or more thousand missiles pointed at them, and increasingly accurate ones. So we're in for a very dangerous ride. And then you factor in that the Russians are much stronger and Putin better than anyone else, and that the Chinese are not going to back down. They're not going to other part of the world that they want to concentrate on. But they've also sent advisors to Syria, probably at Putin's encouragement. Proxy world war, it could get out of control in the era of nuclear weapons, finding ourselves facing my generation grew up with, and we thought your generation would be able to.
Any more questions, comments, folks?
Hi, Mr. Bruzonsky. My name is Emily. Is basically about the moral aspect of all this foreign policy. Do you, or even do you believe that it's important? Do you think that state actors and cut past or look past their national interests and start looking at the lives of every single part of someone's life?
So in other words, is there any hope?
You know, there's a tendency to be optimistic and hopeful. Be that way. Unfortunately, the system of morality and for what's right. It's a dastardly game where you can go to major meetings. Was one a very swanky lunch at the St. Regis held by one of the Democratic Party think tanks just a week ago. There was a big conference at the Reagan Center with 1,000 people the Saudis had invited. They don't call it that, but that's under the table, that's what it is. And never does the word morality come up. Never does a discussion of what it means to kill 2 million people since 9/11. Never does it come up. Never does what it means to Arabs when you hang Saddam, even those who hated Saddam, to see an Arab president hanged like that and the other one sodomized. Both of these people were cutthroat dictators, and in a sense I hated them both. But nevertheless, it was done to them to warn everybody. You're with us, we'll protect you and take care of you. Doesn't matter how many people you kill and what kind of a war criminal you are. You're not with us, doesn't matter how much support you have from your own people. We'll undermine you and we'll do you in. Putin would be an example which I'll give outside the Middle East. Why does he repress NGOs? Why does he clamp down on civil liberties? Why does he do the things that my Russian friends, including a Fulbright scholar who lived here in Washington, she's back in Moscow, and they hate him and they're so against him because of what he does to their own society. And they're right. But when I point out to them Putin does it for a reason. He knows we're out to get him. He knows we use our NGOs, we use our business people, we use our diplomats, we use Fulbright scholars, we use everybody to undermine his regime, to attempt to bring about a coup. And if that coup should result in his being slaughtered in the streets, it would be like Hillary laughing about what happened to Gaddafi. Remember what happened to Gaddafi after we bombed his caravan and bombed for 6 months or whatever period of time it was. Then when he was literally raped and sodomized, Hillary laughed about it on television. So I wish I could give you some, I wish I could say that people care about what's happened to other people, and we care about the only brings tears to my eyes when I think about the refugees and I think about the death. Think how little money, how little money we put killing and bombing and destroying every day.
More questions, folks. Comments.
Months ago and just reopened it within 2 weeks for the election. How political is the FBI in your view?
They actually take pride in being professionals. Not all of them, of course. But when Comey did what he did, my God, it was only last Friday. It seems like ages ago. He did so under intense pressure, not just about the email. Into the Clinton Foundation because he was so ordered to do by. Turns out that the investigation kept going because even the FBI, there are other departments and there are other protocols. Of course, we think back to what Hoover did, and the building is still named after him. So, and think back to all the secret files they had and what was going on with Martin Luther King. And but when I think of Washington institutions, the CIA is much more corrupted and much more dangerous. Even the Pentagon is considerably corrupted because the people who advance through the ranks over the years have to have played the game their entire careers. The FBI does have a sense of professionalism, and I think the leaks you will see and hear about literally yesterday and today, where people are coming forward and leaking. The primary leak went to Fox News, but I'm sure they're leaking to others. And they're saying the Clinton Foundation is actually a pay-for-play operation. Trump is right about that. Of course, Trump has done his own playing, but he wasn't Secretary of State, and he was making money in business. The Clintons set themselves up as Clinton Incorporated, how to cash in money from the Saudis, from the Qataris, from the UAE, from the extremely wealthy Jewish Zionist contributors in the tens of millions. And it ended up in their pockets. And they've had all kinds of excuses. Oh, we don't take money from the foundation and this and that. Yeah, they don't take money directly from the foundation. Instead, they get the same people who contribute to the foundation to arrange a $500,000 speaking fee for them. And that's considered okay in our system. That's considered an acceptable part of our capitalist system. Okay, I went on too much about the FBI, which I don't know that much about, actually.
More questions. Yes.
Morning, sir. What role do you see Ryland, name? What role do you see the U.S. military playing, or what role would you like to see it play in the next decade? And do you think it's possible to reduce our military involvement internationally, given what the U.S. has done over the past years?
It will be very, very difficult because the forest fires have already been ignited. How another person asked the question about how we can stop this, and I gave my suggestions what I would do if I were a professor or writing an article, if I weren't constrained by American politics, constrained by the way Washington works. The military, rightly so, are professionals controlled by civilians. They take pride in being professionals like the FBI people do. They also take pride in not rocking the boat so that after 20 years they can comfortably retire with a big pension, and if they're generals, go on to other lucrative things, and if they're less than that, they can live on their pensions and things. I don't think the change will come from inside the military, the way it's structured. I don't see where the change will come from. Academia has been infiltrated. People are afraid. The media, you can speak up, but you're no longer going to be on mainstream TV programs. You're only going to be on alternative programs, or, to laugh at myself, doing a weekly program for 10 years on the cable access channels in Washington, thinking that the content itself would give me some influence, and wrongly realizing that without an advertising budget and without promotion and without being able to reach large numbers of people, one can barely have an impact, no matter how much what you're saying is valuable. And I'll just mention, I'll put in a plug for myself for those of you who are serious about pursuing these things. I had a student intern last year put all of the hundreds of Mideast reality TV programs on the internet. They're searchable for the first time. They're at Vimeo, and you can actually watch different programs over that period of time, which is 1994 till 2004. And Hisham, I'm sure you'll remember, you had come to Washington in 1994 after the Oslo Peace Agreement, and you were one of the first persons I interviewed on that program.
Indeed I do.
At least those programs, those two programs, show your class, because it'll be interesting. One, they see you and what you were saying back then, but two, it's very informative about the history of where we were at that point.
That's a deal. All right. Okay. Excellent. One or two more questions at once, I think.
Hi, Mr. Bruzonsky. My name is Michael. You referenced Kennedy earlier as a reason that Obama is not more active, like in maybe pushing his own agenda in foreign policy. I wanted to ask what you think actually happened during the Kennedy assassination and why.
In 1 minute or less. I would never have believed this when I was a student. I didn't until recent years, after the provocations of 9/11. Gone to, and after reading books I wouldn't have read. But I do now. Kennedy was killed by what's called the deep state, which is long-time actors in Washington who sometimes in the FBI, sometimes of the Congress. But rather than avoiding your question, I'll actually answer it, although sounds crazy. I'm aware it sounds crazy, but there's so much evidence, but actual evidence. When Kennedy complex, which is the challenge that Ike gave him when he left, when he was truly going to take us down a new course. He was going to jettison LBJ as his vice president. LBJ wasn't going to be the vice president for the next election cycle. A combination of people in the deep state, in the agency, and the vice president decided, just like Julius Caesar in Rome, that the emperor had to go. That's my terrible conclusion, and I feel awful even saying it to you in just a few minutes because it took me so many years to be comfortable even thinking this way.
All right. Any final question? Okay. Quick.
Hi, Mr. Bruzonsky. My name is Mark. I was wondering, considering Saudi Arabia is such an oil revenue-based country and the price of oil is pretty low right now, how do you think, if at all, it will affect its standing in the new Middle Eastern power?
The Saudis are in panic. They decided they couldn't be the dignified presented themselves. They decided their part of the world and that they had to stop it. For them, the Arab Spring was, oh my God, but the Americans aren't doing everything possible to help Mubarak. There's his whole career. Huge amounts of weapons, over $100 billion worth. They've decided to do everything they can with military means and with money throughout the region. They've activated the GCC. They wanted, along with the Israelis, the Obama administration, to start a war with Iran and bring down that regime. They'd prefer it be brought down by the They wanted the Syrian regime to be brought down by the CIA too. For the time being, the Saudis and the Israelis are in control. How long they can keep the boiling nature of the Middle East under control and stop revolutions from spreading, I don't know. We didn't expect the Arab Spring, but the peaceful revolutions didn't work very well. And they got turned, things are much worse in Egypt than they were before. So when the next Arab Spring comes, I think it will be an and I don't think people like me will be able to analyze it very well. The progressive class, the people who are going to be, are not people talking to me and not people publishing in English where
Any absolutely last quick question. Are you content, folks? Any last comments, Mark, that you would like to make?
This opportunity to speak to your students, but letting me, without restraint, although they're, and not stopping me, people found pretty outrageous, because I myself years ago found some of the just dangerous time for our own country. The questioner of the woman who asked about civil war. Proxy war. We're in a world war. This is World War III with cyber dimension. Are being destroyed. And in the end, it's the superpower as the world's policeman. We're the if I'll use an expression that I also hate, but nevertheless, I feel it sometimes. We're the good Germans. We're the ones that allow this to happen. And I think back to the Iraq invasion, and I think back, it was so cold that day of the demonstration. There were 1.5 million people marching against what was about to happen. The war that Bush and Cheney and the neocons were about, and the Israelis were about to ignite in Iraq. And I still remember that day. And I remember the grandmothers who came all night on a bus from Rochester. They were all in wheelchairs, and they brought their grandchildren, and they'd written all these anti-war songs, and they're freezing, and they've got blankets all over them, but they're smiling and singing their songs and trying to stop the unleashing of the military forces at that time. And there were so many intellectuals trying to do it. Myself, I remember going on Fox News 3 days in a row, years before, asked, do the Iraqis have weapons of mass destruction? And saying, look, I'm not the CIA. Expert opinion, no, they don't any longer have weapons of mass destruction. People knew these things, but have been outflanked. We've all been outmaneuvered. We live in not only a war state, a criminal state on the world scale, but I'll go back to the phrase, the good Germans. We've become a captive society that tolerates, pays for, and then we're reduced to voting for Hillary Clinton in a few days because the other alternative is so much worse, even though her husband and her party have been so much a part of the crimes and so much. One more thing I'll just throw in. I live in Washington. We have so many for wars in the world, but our metro system is falling apart. We don't have the millions to keep our metro system going. Rock Creek Park has to be closed because the roadway isn't safe. And Memorial Bridge going to Arlington Cemetery has restrictions on it, and they say we'll have to close within a few years because we can't figure out how to fix it. Country have we allowed ourselves to be living in? Not to mention our bad, not to mention so many, our guns, the violence of guns, so many people. Our country to come to, and what are we all going to do about it?
Always very thought-provoking, thoughtful, astute, and really for steering our thought process here. Gratitude and so many thanks to you, Mark, and I have no doubt in my mind.
And thank you to you, Hisham, for the your own commitments, your whole lifetime, your own my voice, and you picked it out of the crowd.
Yes, that's
Thank you, students.
don't leave folks. Mark, thank you so much again.